Hi there, this is Kevin Patton with a brief preview of the next episode of The A&P Professor, the podcast for teachers of human anatomy and physiology. In episode 33, I'm going to give you some information about the genetics of hair color, focusing on new information about the inheritance of red hair and how complicated the inheritance of hair color, or really any complex trait, is starting to look. And I'll have new information on how we form those sensory maps of our body and the brain so that we know where in or on our body all that sensory input is coming from. And listener Krista Rumpolsky gets us started in talking about how frequently should we be giving tests and exams in the A&P course. The A&P Professor podcast is sponsored by the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society, HAPS, promoting excellence in the teaching of human anatomy and physiology for over 30 years. Did you know that registration for the annual conference next May in Portland, Oregon is open? And did you know that there's a substantial early bird discount? So check that out now at the approfessor.org/HAPS. Well, it's time for some word dissections. And the first one I have is a term called omnigenic. And omnigenic refers to an emerging idea in genetics that all genes affect every complex trait. In other words, it's not just one or two or a few genes that is determining the nature of any one complex trait, that really all genes in some way, directly or indirectly, affect that complex trait. So breaking down the word, omni means all, gen means genes or genetics. It literally means create, but is used here to mean genes or genetics. And then the IC ending means relating to. So omnigenic means relating to all genes, which makes sense given how we're using that term. The next term that I want to dissect is a little bit longer, so that makes it more fun to dissect, right? And that is primary somatosensory cortex, which is located in the postcentral gyrus of the cortex, just posterior to the central sulcus. And that's where our tactile body map is located, where we determine where that tactile sensory information is coming from in our body. And the first part of that term, primary, is an ordinary English word, but we can break it down into its word parts to help us understand it. And so the prime part means first, and the ary ending means relating to. So primary is going to mean relating to something that's first or something that is of the first order of importance. And then somatosensory, that's a little bit more fun to dissect, comes from soma, which means body. And then the TO part is just a combining syllable to get us to the next part, which is sense or sensory. And of course, sensory is a word that means related to senses. So literally what somatosensory means is related to our body senses. And then cortex refers to that outer layer of gray matter of the cerebrum of the brain. And what cortex means literally is bark. And I think knowing that translation is very helpful to both us and our students because it helps them remember where it is and what it's like. It's like thick bark on a tree. It's that outer part of a tree, of a tree's structure. It's the outer part of the cerebrum in this case. So it's an outer layer, and that helps us remember what it is. Okay, so we got two terms out of the way. I have a third term for us to dissect, and that's homunculus. Plural is homunculi. And what I'm referring to here in particular is that map, or even sometimes it's shown as like a 3D model of a person that represents that somatic body map that's in the primary somatosensory cortex. And it's very disproportionate because we know that that map has a lot more processing room dedicated to our lower face, for example, and our fingers, as opposed to our thigh or our arm or forearm. And so that's like a little miniature person mapped out in our brain, or at least that's a way of thinking of it, and that's the way it's often represented in diagrams. In the show notes and in the episode page, I'll have a homunculus there so you can see what I'm talking about. But what homunculus literally means is a little person. So you break that down, the hom, H-O-M part, is from homo, which means man or human. And then the unculus ending is really just a way in Latin of making homo diminutive form. And the diminutive form means that it's small. So homunculus means a diminutive man or a small man. So yeah, it's small. It can fit on a page, right? It's a tiny little, in this case, imaginary man, a diagrammatic man to help us kind of think about what's going on in that somatosensory cortex. But we can also apply it to the little map that applies to the somatomotor cortex as well. The searchable transcript for this preview and for the full episode is sponsored by the American Association of Anatomists, AAA. You can find them at anatomy.org. In case you were wondering, yes, I do have another recommendation from the A&P Professor Book Club, and it's a book about evolution. And you might think to yourself, no, wait a minute. In the typical A&P course, we don't typically have a section on evolution. So why would this be important for A&P teachers? And I'll tell you why. Because everything we're teaching is a result of evolution, right? And so even if we don't mention it when we're talking about the structures or the functions of the human body, or we don't bring in evolution when we're answering student questions about why things are the way they are in the human body, at least it's there behind all of that information. And I think as up-to-date teachers, we need to stay up-to-date in the core principles of biology in general, and certainly those areas, like evolution, that certainly do overlap what we're doing in A&P. And so this book is titled Improbable Destinies, Fate, Chance, and the Future of Evolution. And it's written by Jonathan Losos. And that name may ring a bell because he is the lead author on a popular general biology textbook. So you may be using that at your school. The name rings a bell for me because for many years, actually 40 years, he's been a friend of mine. He and I started out as zookeepers together at the St. Louis Zoo. And see, there's that zoo connection with a lot of people in the world of biology and A&P. And Jonathan is one of them. And when he'd been talking about his book for a long time, and he's a really, really smart guy, and he really, really knows a lot about evolution. And he's also a great storyteller. And so I was expecting a lot of good things from his book, and I was not disappointed. This book is great. And it's told as a series of stories. I mean, we've talked about this on this podcast before. The best way to learn something is in the form of a story. And in this book, Jonathan has story after story, some of it based on his own research. Now, Jonathan's specialty is lizards and the evolution of lizards. And so a lot of the stories relate to the evolution of lizards, and he goes into other organisms as well, like even the duck-billed platypus. But it's all evolution, and at all of us organisms, we all are participating in this process. So even though it's not strictly about human evolution, it's going to explain some current ideas and some emerging ideas about evolution that I think all of us ought to be up to date on. And besides that, it's just a really interesting book to read. It's actually very fun to read, I think. So here it is, Improbable Destinies, Fate, Chance, and the Future of Evolution by Jonathan Losos. That's Losos. Well, we're getting close to the end of the term, aren't we? And the end of the calendar year. Now's a good time to remind you, you still have homework due. Yeah, I didn't forget. And I hope you didn't forget either that a few episodes ago, I asked each of you to share an episode of the A&P Professor podcast with at least one other person. And I know it's kind of late in the game and things are rushed and it's kind of hard to fit in there. So if you can't do it now, that's okay. You can have an extension. I'm very lenient when it comes to podcast homework. And I really do appreciate those of you that have already started sharing it. And also, now's a good time to start debriefing this last term, or maybe debriefing for the entire calendar year. You may remember back in episode 17, I talked quite a bit about how helpful the process of intentional debriefing at the end of a term can be. And one of the benefits, besides really kind of seeing what progress we have and kind of emphasizing to ourselves that we have made some progress and that we have accomplished some things and students have been successful in our course, but it also kind of cleans off our desk, both our physical desk and our mental desk, so that we really can approach this upcoming time off with sort of a clean mind and a clean desk and not really have any lingering things on our mind. We're organized and ready to go for the next term, but we're also ready to set things aside and really attend to ourselves and attend to our own mental and physical well-being. So now might be a good time to go back to episode 17 and kind of review some tips on how to do that end of term debriefing.